Hello, comrades, and welcome to another video on the Russian Revolution area of Study 1. We've made it to the Second Revolution, which brings about the end of Tsarism in Russia altogether. It's the February Revolution of 1917. So here are a few quotes that some of them might be useful to keep in mind and to make note of that relate to the February Revolution. So the first comes from the Petrograd Chief of Police. It's from October 1916, so just a few months before the February Revolution. And he said, "We are on the eve of big events, compared with which 1905 was child's play." So 1905 was, as Trotsky said, the prologue to the revolutions of 1917. Tsarina Alexandra on the 25th of February 1917, and you'll find out the context of that very shortly, said, "This is a hooligan movement. If the weather were very cold, they would probably all stay at home. But all this will pass and become calm if only the Duma will behave itself." So saying that everything's fine. Don't worry, everything's fine. There are many times throughout the study of revolutions, both Russia and Chinese, where I see a quote and it makes me think of that meme with the person in the dog in the burning house with "everything's fine" or "I'm fine, this is fine." So things are not fine. It's more than a hooligan movement, as the Tsarina will find out shortly, but she believes it's all okay. Tsar Nicholas, on being warned that the situation was deteriorating in Petrograd and immediate action was needed, on the 27th of February 1917, said that fat Rodzianko, remember he's the president of the Duma, has again sent me some nonsense to which I will not even reply. Rodzianko is an Octoberist, so he is loyal to the Tsar. He is a conservative liberal, and the Tsar is ignoring his pleas and his warnings. On the same day, soldiers of the Petrograd garrison, ordered to suppress the revolution, start fraternizing with the workers. One soldier, Fyodor Lind, remembered shouting as he ran through his barracks, "To arms, to arms! They are killing innocent people, our brothers and sisters." That's not a good sign when the soldiers of the Petrograd garrison get involved. Then we've got General Kabalov on the 27th of February 1917, saying, "I beg to inform His Imperial Highness that I am not able to carry out his instructions about the restoration of order in the capital." Does that mean he's turning against the Tsar, or that the situation has become too serious for him to do anything? We'll find out shortly. And then finally, on the 2nd of March 1917, Tsar Nicholas said, "If it is necessary that I should abdicate for the good of Russia, then I am ready for it." So there's just a few quotes. Now we're going to go through a timeline of the February Revolution. It all happens very quickly. So on the 18th of February, workers of Petrograd's Putilov Steelworks go on strike over pay and conditions. 40,000 workers are brought onto the streets. Now the Putilov Steelworks were a very revolutionary and rebellious workplace. We saw the Putilov Steelworks being the place of strikes in the past, when 4 steel workers were dismissed in December 1904, which led to strikes throughout Petrograd and led to Bloody Sunday. So that is sort of the first instance of revolutionary action, is on the 18th of February. On the 22nd of February, workers from neighboring factories joined the strike after Putilov Steelworks managers locked workers out. The strikers denounce the government. Temperatures rise to 8 degrees and people are keen to be outside after a bitterly cold winter. So that's sort of what Tsarina Alexandra was alluding to when she said that if the weather were very cold, they would probably all stay at home. On the 23rd of February, International Women's Day. Now, this, to many, is the triggering event for the February Revolution. Obviously, there was action happening before, on the 18th and the 22nd of February, but the 23rd of February is an important date to remember, International Women's Day. So thousands of working class women take to the streets, waving banners with slogans such as "Give us bread," alluding to the economic and social conditions in Petrograd at the time. Called on by the women, thousands of male factory workers joined the march, arming themselves with makeshift weapons. So what started with 40,000 workers on the streets has jumped up to 90,000 people marching. On the 24th of February, the strike now numbers 200,000. So in the space of a day, it's more than doubled. No leading revolutionaries direct the action. The protesters demand an end to the war and an end to autocratic rule, and there is fighting between workers and police. So that part here about no leading revolutionaries direct the action, that's important. The February Revolution was people-driven. It wasn't driven by the vanguard party of the Bolsheviks. It wasn't driven by any of the revolutionary parties, the Bolsheviks, Mensheviks, or the SRs. It was really driven by the people. On the 25th of February, more joined the strikes. Cossacks, remember, they are the nationality of horsemen. That sounds really weird. They're not men, horses, centaur-like people. They are people from the south of Russia who are well known for their cavalry skills. So Cossacks are sent to suppress the movement. While Cossacks were effective at Bloody Sunday, on this day they side with the soldiers. There are instances of Cossacks charging at workers and then sort of pulling back at the last minute and laughing and sort of saying, no, you're all right, or letting workers through barriers that they set up and that sort of thing. Now, this is the day that the Tsarina calls it a hooligan movement, and Nicholas orders the commander of the Petrograd garrison to end the disorders. On the 26th of February, the protest has risen to 300,000 people. Rodzianko, president of the Duma, cables the Tsar saying the situation is serious. That night, soldiers debate in their garrisons and some decide to mutiny, declaring their support for the workers. The Tsar refuses to listen to Rodzianko and instead orders the dismissal of the Duma. On the 27th of February, a lot happens. Rodzianko cabled the Tsar again, and the Tsar does not even reply to the nonsense that was sent by Rodzianko. There are now 400,000 workers on general strike. There are mutinies among the Petrograd garrison. 70,000 soldiers join the protesters. Now, that's significant because the protesters previously had makeshift weapons. Now they have real weapons. The Duma suspends meetings, but 12 members, including Pavel Milyakov from the cadets, Rodzianko from the Octobrists, and Alexander Kerensky from the SRs form the Provisional Committee. The Provisional Executive Committee of the Soviet of Workers' Deputies, that's a long word for basically the Soviet, made up of Mensheviks and SRs, also meet. This assembly turns into the Petrograd Soviet. Now, already, before I continue, the Provisional Committee and the Petrograd Soviet are two distinct powers that are going to become relevant in our next few videos. So on the 28th of February, there is widespread surrender of police and Tsarist officials. Workers and soldiers control the streets. There is a sea of red across Petrograd to signify the worker, the socialist revolution by the workers. The election of workers and soldiers deputies to the Soviet continues. Tsar Nicholas, thinking that his presence will bring order, sets off for Petrograd, but his train is stopped and redirected by revolutionary troops. On the 1st of March, the Provisional Committee resolves to take power as a provisional government. So we've now got what is going to be the next government of Russia, or the first non-Tsarist government of Russia. The Petrograd Soviet, the other power, accepts this development. They say, that's fine, you can have control. However, on the same day, they release Soviet Order Number 1, which claims that soldiers of the Petrograd garrison will obey the orders of the new government so long as they do not contradict the will of the Soviet. I.e., yes, you can have power, or you can have authority, but we have the power. We have the backing of the soldiers, and if you do anything that goes against our will, then the soldiers of the Petrograd garrison can fight it, can overthrow you. So this starts the period known as dual authority or dual power. The provisional government on one side, the Petrograd Soviet on the other. On the 2nd of March, Tsar Nicholas meets with generals of the High Command and representatives of the Provisional Committee. Nicholas is urged to abdicate and reluctantly agrees, abdicating for himself and his son. He was worried about his family and also said that if it's for the good of Russia, then I will step down. He, however, doesn't see that the people don't want a Tsar, and so he announces that his younger brother, Mikhail, should be the new Tsar. In Petrograd, the provisional government is formally announced. On the 3rd of March, the provisional government meets with new Tsar Mikhail, who, after much discussion, declares his support for the provisional government and offers his own abdication. This brings an end to Romanov rule and Tsarism in Russia once and for all. So the Romanovs had been in power since 1613. Tsarism had been around much longer than that. And so on the 3rd of March, 1917 marks the end of Tsarism. So the February Revolution took only 10 days. News of the revolution spread throughout the empire, leading to mass jubilation and celebrations. Many former police are murdered and former ministers imprisoned. The first international, this is just an interesting fact, knowing what happens later with the Cold War, the first international government to recognize Russia's new provisional government is the USA. So here are some pictures, some photos from the February Revolution. We've got International Women's Day here on the 23rd of February. So women marching through the streets of Petrograd, holding banners that say things like, "Give us bread," "Down with the Tsar." This was women who were hungry and poor, and their husbands were offered a war that they didn't necessarily agree with, who were demanding change. Here we've got a photo from the 27th of February when soldiers mutinied and joined the protesters. They all have their rifles, so this shows that the protests turned from largely unarmed strikes and protests to now armed protests after soldiers from the Petrograd garrison mutinied. Let's have a look at some historical interpretations of the February Revolution, starting with Robert Service over here. He said there was no popular certitude that the last knell of Romanov power had been tolled, i.e., there was no certainty that the end of the Romanovs was coming. What made the difference, finally, was that the middle-ranking enforcers of order on the streets had lost their will to use violence to maintain the status quo. So he's saying it wasn't certain that this was going to happen, but the people who were told to suppress the revolution ended up losing their will to do that. Richard Pipes blames the February Revolution on the war. He said the immediate cause of the February Revolution of 1917 would be the collapse of Russia's fragile political and economic structures under the strains of the war. So it's not to do with the Tsar, it's not to do with the workers demanding change, it's to do with the economic and political strains of World War I. Orlando Fage says the Tsarist regime's downfall was not inevitable, but its own stupidity made it so. So this goes back to the idea that the Tsar is the little father, and that a strong and capable Tsar will maintain the status quo, whereas a weak Tsar will be open to challenges. And so Tsar Nicholas was incredibly weak, and his regime was incredibly weak. And Tsarina Alexandra and Rasputin caused much chaos in the capital. So even though the Tsarist regime's downfall was not inevitable, its own stupidity, such as making himself commander-in-chief and leaving his wife, a German Tsarina Alexandra, in charge in the capital, that made the downfall inevitable. Michael Lynch, who is better known for his work on the Chinese Revolution, but he said the demonstrations did not in themselves cause the revolution. It was the defection of the Tsar's supporters that brought about the fall of the Romanov dynasty. So that's sort of similar to what Robert Service said. Basically, the workers didn't cause the change. It was all of the people who were meant to suppress the revolution turning against the Tsar. And finally, Alan Woods, who's a good socialist historian, says the February Revolution was caused by the spontaneous upsurge of the politically radicalized masses, i.e., this was caused by the people demanding change. So a few different interpretations of the same event. I hope you found this video interesting and useful, and I will see you next time.